didn't really meet Rabbi Sacks till much later in my career. And I mean, not personally, but with his teachings. But up until that point, when I started out, much of what we were doing with Torah commentary was really, especially at the seminary, was really about context. We did what we called Heilgeschichte and Sitzenleben, which is fancy terms for learning Torah in a scholarly manner, in a context. So what we were taught was about the ancient Near East and what the Torah had in common with other cultures, what was the same, what was different, and what was the Torah trying to do. And so a lot of my teaching was kind of very intellectual at the seminary. I was not introduced to anything from the heart, from the spirit, till much, much later on. The part that I did like a lot, though, was Midrash. So we had separate classes just on Midrash, which is interpretation, which could either be more folk tale, more folk narrative stories, imagination, or more legal, depending on what you were studying. But otherwise, my whole world of understanding the Torah was very narrow and very limited. And as the years went by, I started to slowly get introduced to different Torah people. We still use that blue edition of Hertz, the Hertz Kumats. If you remember that, raise your hand. It was a whole debate. I remember at Adat Shalom. I mean, that was written like in 1920, and nobody wanted to get rid of it because that's all we had. So we ultimately, of course, got the Eitz Chaim, but before that, the Reform movement came out with their Torah commentary, and then the Art Scroll, and then the Eitz Chaim from the conservative movement, and then the Reform movement, Green Torah for women, and it started just escalating, all these commentaries and stuff. And then when the internet came, all kinds of other things came, and then I discovered this guy probably a good almost 15 years ago, maybe not more than that. I discovered Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And what I liked about him was it was something different. He had such a breadth of knowledge of not just the Jewish world, but the secular world. So he'd bring in philosophy, and he'd bring in poetry, and he'd bring in music. And he brought in so many different influences into a conversation about Torah. And that was pretty much the first time I had anybody talk like that. He wasn't just, pedantic. He wasn't trying to just drum home an Orthodox point of view. He was open-hearted and engaging and brought in other religious traditions. At that point in his life, he was doing a lot of interfaith. And I want to share with you that during the Enlightenment, the late 1800s, when so many Jews were out of the ghetto and were beginning, it was during emancipation and enlightenment, and the Jews were allowed now to participate in universities and in cultural events. They started to assimilate. And in Germany, the assimilation was god awful. It was like up to 85, 90% assimilation. So Rabbi Samuel Raphael Hirsch came out then, and he had a Torah commentary, which is also excellent. But his goal was to bring more people to Torah, to have it be more open instead of so parochial. So I found Rabbi Sacks was in that kind of teaching, just expansive and inclusive to so many different ideas, instead of a more of a narrow parochial view. And then I became a total devotee. I've taught so many of his teachings. I bought all his books. When our president became a leader, I didn't want to talk about him, but I gave sermons about leadership, not about the president per se. And my brother-in-law, Joseph Telushkin, told me about Sacks' book on leadership, which I didn't know about. He has a whole book just on leadership, and each parsha is about different leadership qualities and what that means. And that was extraordinary. And then he has a whole book on ethics, and then the book on the holidays. And I don't know, I have like 2 shelves just with Rabbi Sacks. And we're very blessed now to study together. This book that we're studying today is a gift that he gave us before he died. He wrote a book on morality, which I ordered but have not read yet. And he wrote this just the last year before he died, knowing he was not really going to make it. An extraordinary event. He also made sure that he revised his leadership essays, and every week he still has an essay coming out. based on what he revised from an earlier book. So in my deepest heart and soul and my intellect, I am so grateful for Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, for his inspiration for people to live holier, more ethical lives with inclusiveness, with compassion, with tolerance, and with deep learning and appreciation of our tradition and the traditions of others. So Zichrono Livracha, may his memory always be an inspiration and a blessing to us all. And I invite you to learn more about him yourselves, and then be able to go and teach others. And anything you share that you've learned about him, send me an email. I'd love to hear, or a text. So let's get started now. I'd like us to look at the first page together, and we're going to share a PowerPoint that I made. And after we share this first page, then we'll go back to having a little bit of some conversation and then move on with some of the rest of the teaching. So here we go. I've just loved making PowerPoints. I find they really help when you're teaching. So he uses this expression in this Parsha. So we're studying Parsha by Yeshev. We're now at the beginning of the Joseph story. 3 complete Parshiot are devoted to the story of Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And his story is one of the longest narratives in the whole Torah, longer than the Exodus, longer than the story of creation. A lot is given to the story of Joseph. So here's the question that I'd like you to think about, and in a few minutes we'll go back to the other view, to our gallery view, and we'll unmute. So here's the question. Is our life a meaningless sequence of random events? And as Joseph Heller said, is our life a trash bag of random coincidences blown open in the wind? Or is it, as Rabbi Sacks says, something different, which we're going to study today? Rabbi Sacks says, in retrospect, failures are learning experiences. And I love this quote that he wrote. We live life facing the future, but we understand life only when it has become our past. So in a moment, I want us to think, do you feel that life is just random, fate, coincidence, sequence of random events, maybe even a little meaningless that we just react to and have to survive and overcome and cope? Or is life full of purpose and meaning when we look back and see what's happened to us? So we're going to spend 5 minutes or so to share your experience. So Maddie, if you could be so kind and put us in gallery view, I'd like to see everybody. And if you have something to say, raise your hand and Maddie will highlight you. So I guess I could put myself in gallery view. There we go. Okay. So comments on that opening teaching, his opening, beginning of his essay. Be honest, how are you feeling about this? Just share.
And because this is a more casual event, you can all mute and unmute yourselves, and then I'll just kind of follow the conversation with the spotlighting.
So feel free to jump in then. Go ahead.
I've definitely learned from my mistakes. And I think it's important that we have mistakes and we grow by our mistakes and we don't feel failure by our mistakes, but instead it's a way of growth.
So not random, but the mistakes are there to help you learn and grow.
Yes.
So they have purpose and meaning.
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn. Beautiful. Next.
I just think life is a lesson.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, Toba. I think every day of our life is a lesson, and you learn sometimes the lesson in the moment, but often in reflection.
So Gail, you're such a beautifully wise, wonderful person. I love you to death. I mean, love you to life. So I'm curious. Do you believe every single action is a lesson? Every action in life is a lesson, or some of them just kind of random and just happens, or nature, or just inevitable because of genes, genetics, or anything like that?
Okay, so let's take a specific, like the loss of a loved one, particularly if it was a young loved one. I don't know. I think there are some things I can't explain, and I'm not sure of the lesson. So do I think everything is? No, I think most things are. I think there's some unexplainables,
Right.
some that we maybe will have to come to grips with forever. And
Thank you.
there'll be no explanation or no, I don't believe everything happens for a reason, or if there's a reason, I don't think that in my lifetime I'll figure it out.
That's a more nuanced answer. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we all do. Thank you, Gail. Suzanne, you're on full screen.
Gail was just talking about losing a spouse, which leads me to the randomness of a lot of things that happen in life. But I have learned lessons. Every time something terrible has happened in my life, I have learned lessons. And the death of my husband spurred a total change in who I was. I went from painting and drawing and visual art to verbal art. And so I think that those things do change you if you're open to the change.
Beautiful. Thank you. So from inexplicable, some things we may never understand or know, and yet sometimes over time we do, and we see ourselves shifting because of a horrific, tragic experience that we might have encountered. Marion, you have your hand up. Go ahead, just jump in. You need to unmute, Marion.
Oh, I was unmuted there for a laugh, so I apologize for that. Now I'm unmuted for this. This is one of the gifts of age, is that I think as a younger person, I felt more like a pinball machine, in a pinball machine. And as I've gotten older, I've realized more and more and more over time. I mean, in my 30s, I started realizing a lot of this too, but more and more and more how I have been informed by my past and how I've been able to grow from my past and where I've taken a turn that I might not have taken if it weren't for something. As horrific as it might have been, what it did for me was spur growth. It's either that or go into the cave. So or go into deep depression or something like that. And that, not that that didn't happen for little short periods of time. I've been fortunate and able to come out of it. But I think that everything, no matter how horrific, has taught me something. I mean, my first real death was when I was 35 with my best friend. And that was a complete, I mean, it was horrible. She left 2 young children and all of this, and it was a huge growth experience for me about myself and what I really wanted and what I didn't want and all of that. So anyway, that's my
and I love your analogy to life as a pinball machine. I think that's a great metaphor. And I think that's what we're going to use when we get back. So let's have 1 or 2 more comments and we'll get back to teaching. Jump in. Thank you, Marion. Hello to your friend in the background again. Just love him.
Okay, Rabbi, this is Robin. I just started reading Rabbi Sacks' book on science and religion, and I've only just begun, but I think it was a good choice. I'm really enjoying it. One of the things, speaking as somebody with decades with young children, I found that we humans from a very, very young age, we are meaning-making machines. We want to find meaning in things. I like to think that I have derived more meaning now at my age I am now than when I was 9 or 10. But the 9 and 10-year-olds, they want to figure out what things mean. So I think it's part of being human.
Excellent insight. Thanks, Robin. Okay, one last one and we're ready to go back.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Okay. I think that we learn a lot from others, not just watching them, but just randomly. I'll give you an example that's very nice to give you as soon as Suzanne stops drinking, because I want to talk about her. Suzanne Galland writes poetry, and she gave me a poetry book that she had written, and I read a poem every day. And now I'm going through the book a second time because each one has given me something different. And sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't agree, but at least I'm cognizant of how I'm different from she.
Thank you. So you're saying that the way you react to what you read, or the way people teach, or the events in the world really make a difference.
Yeah.
I appreciate all your sharing right now. So now I'm going to ask Maddie to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to mute everybody just so I can do a few pages here. Let's stay in page 1 for a minute, Maddie. I want to look at the pictures. Go back to the first page. So everyone sees the picture of the brothers. Actually, it's an interesting picture, right? Like lowering down by a rope. I was very surprised by this picture because I would assume they just threw him in, and something about lowering him down, like it's just so deliberate and so conscience. There's so much conscience and intent there. It's not as if like haphazard. It bothers me that they lowered him down. That they were so aware of what they were doing to this brother, the feelings that they had. So let's go to the right-hand picture here. This is a wonderful picture of the coat of many colors, Ketona Pasim. And let's start right there. So the story begins that Jacob loved Joseph more than all the other sons. And the Ketona Pasim, the coat of many colors, he bought deliberately for his one, I mean, he had it made for Joseph. Now, what is a father thinking? Obviously, there's no books on sibling rivalry at that time, but he had 12 sons, and the sons had different status depending on their order of birth and which mother they were to. And there was a lot of internal problems with these kids to begin with, asserting themselves and who they were in relationship to each other and in the family. And then you have this fakakta coat of many colors. You could just picture a young Joseph who was very handsome, strutting around in this coat. And so when we talk about life, like Marion said, a ping ball machine, sometimes in life there's deliberate actions that we do which causes a pinball effect. So I think we have to remember that coat on the right-hand side, which led inexorably to the throwing into the pit. I don't believe they lowered him. My vision of this is being thrown into this pit without any water. They actually left him there to die until Reuben interceded. So right now, this idea that sometimes we, whether consciously or unconsciously, set different events in motion because of our actions and what we do. So let's go on to slide number 2. Joseph's fall. So love turns to hate and freedom to slavery. So as I said, Joseph was loved by Jacob. Jacob, of course, Yaakov is Jacob or Yisrael or Israel, depending on, his name was changed, but it goes back and forth in the Torah, depending on what's going on around him. Joseph starts telling his brothers about his dreams. So you see on the top, that's the dreams of all the brothers with sheaves of wheat, and they're all bowing down to him. He's in the middle, and the sheaves of wheat are bowing down, and Yaakov and Leah at that point are bowing down because his mother isn't there. And then, of course, he has his other dream, which is in the right-hand side. He's the sun in the middle, and the stars all bow down to him. And the moon is dad, and I don't know which one is mom. But this idea, he imagines that he's so important that he knows he'll be in charge or he'll be a leader someday. And as a young kid, probably 15, 16 years old, he's telling them these dreams he has. And you could imagine how his brothers feel. When they see him coming, so they go out to tend to the flock. And what reason did dad have to send him on his way? If you look at some of the commentators, they said, if Jacob had known about this terrible hatred among his sons, he would have never sent Joseph out. But how could a father be so unaware? So I don't understand what the motivation was, but again, how like in the ping pong effect, first it was the coat of many colors, then keeping Joseph at home, he doesn't have to do the grunt work as much, but he sends his son, his favorite son, out to check in on the boys to see what they're doing. Now, the town that he went, the place that he went to find them, where they should have been, he wasn't there. So he meets that Ish, that amazing person. And this is one of my favorite foundational stories of the Torah, that sometimes when you're wandering around, you know you have a mission, but you don't know how to make it happen. Someone is sent your way. We call it hashgachat pratit, like divine intervention. I believe sometimes that we do have some kind of protective, I believe in God, and I believe God helps us sometimes to figure out where we need to go. So Joseph, this Ish, this anonymous person shows up. Some of the commentators think it was an angel sent by God to send Joseph to this place called Dotan, which is more of an urban area, and where the brothers were probably carousing, drinking a little bit. Who else knew what they were doing? And the sheep, they weren't taking care of the sheep the way they probably should have been, which is another reason that they felt like, well, here comes the master of dream, Baal HaChalamot, they called him. Here's the master of dreams coming to us. He's spying on us. He's going to tattle to dad. We know from the text that he's a tattletailer. So he tells on his brothers. He tells dad what they're doing. So they're angry, they're furious, they're jealous. They feel like he's checking up on them, and they just can't stand him. To take a young boy, he was 17, and to do this to him is just so God awful. But again, what was set into motion, I feel Jacob had a lot of responsibility. And when you have children, to treat one child differently like that, it was inevitable, inexorable that this would ultimately happen. And you see here in the picture below the callousness of the brothers standing around when the caravan of the traders, they're either Ishmaelites or Midianites, who give silver. They literally are selling their younger brother for a couple of silver coins into slavery, into the unknown. And this is only because of the intervention of Reuven, the older son, who said, let's not kill him, we'll put him in the pit, and this way nature will take care of it, but let's not kill him ourselves. And of course, then he was sold, and Reuven felt terrible about that. Let's go to the, it says here from Sharon Alexander, Maddie, that they're not seeing the PowerPoint. So I don't know if there's any issue with the PowerPoint, please put into chat if you're not seeing it, because I see it on my screen. I don't know what the problem is. I'll go on.
I can only suggest to try exiting the Zoom and then coming back in, unless everybody is not seeing it. But I think most people should be seeing it at this point.
Thank you. And we'll be stopping in a moment. I'm going to, I have another few minutes, and then we'll have some conversation. So we know the story. Joseph goes down to Egypt. And who is Joseph, and what is he all about? And this is a very important question. Again, we know that he's handsome. We know he's very charismatic. We know he's bright. He's been taught his whole life that he's important. He's a somebody. And other people recognize that in him. So part of our lives, and whether our lives are random or we have fate, there's the whole nature nurture part of our lives. I mean, who are we? What were we born with? How many of us have charisma? How many of us are beautiful or handsome? And how many of us are have that feeling of self-confidence, that way we were treated as we grew up? So who we are in the world is not so much random as we're a product so much of nature and nurture. And by the time we get to be a young adult, as he is, and he is here, we're so much a product of who we were and what we became. It's so curious. And that's where that idea of ping-ponging or randomness, we're launched at a certain point. That idea of, like, by the time you're sent off to college or you finish high school, you're launched, and so much of who you are is already predetermined. Not that you don't have an ability to change that, but still so much is already set up for you. So Joseph, at first he was favored by fortune. Potiphar, who was a vizier of Pharaoh, put him in charge of his household. He ran the books, he took care of the budgets, he made sure people did the work. But then his beautiful wife, I guess, just wasn't happy with her husband and tried to seduce him over and over and over again. And he always said no. The last no, though, has a trope symbol called a shalshelet, which is only used a few times in all of the Torah. And let me just say, so the no over low for no, this is how it was saying. No, 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 no. And so it's an interesting trope, and it almost like is a trope that he's wondering, should I just get this over with? Should I not? Should I? The rabbis, like, it was like a wink of the rabbis who put that specific trope over the word no. It wasn't just a resounding no, it was a no that wasn't so. So it's like a midrash. Sometimes our Torah reading and the way we sing it is an interpretation of the words. Anyhow, he didn't sleep with her, but she grabbed his garment and then ran outside and said he tried to rape her. So Potiphar did not have him killed, which is curious because in those days you're trying to rape a wife, you would be killed. But Potiphar had high regard for him, so he was only sent to jail. But then in jail too, the jail master really liked him. And in jail, he was put in charge of the other prisoners also. And there, of course, we know he interpreted dreams. And one of the butler was given, you see the picture at the bottom, there were two dreams. One dream was of the butler who was going to be returned to his post as the cup holder to Pharaoh. And as the butler was leaving jail, Joseph begged him, remember me. Remember that I interpreted your dream. Tell Pharaoh that I'm here. I was kidnapped. I don't belong here. I did nothing wrong. But he was forgotten. And this is how the scene ends. Years go by before he's remembered. So let's now go back to gallery view for a minute and unmute, and just some comments at this point about the story of Joseph vis-a-vis the questions that we have about the randomness of life versus life as predetermined, or life as a way of beating your destiny. Just some thoughts that you might have.
I'd like to talk about my father. My father had Addison's disease, and he was not supposed to live past the age of 25. And when cortisone came, he lived, and he lived to 66. And every day of his life, he felt gratitude to God and to science. And because of that, tzedakah became one of the most important things in his life.
Very curious. So who he was shaped by the tragedy that he had, and he overcame it.
Yes.
That's an amazing story. Thank you, Lynn. So what else says, how do you resonate with the Joseph story so far? I think, and I just want to share that ping pong metaphor that Marion gave us. I think in some ways, maybe Joseph felt that way about his life. Up and down, back and forth. Fortunes rise, fortune falls, fortune rise, fortune falls. I can't imagine what this poor kid was feeling.
I think that possibly it was predetermined because he was ending up, that he saved his whole family during the famine. So it was all predetermined that he'd go and become the viceroy to the Pharaoh and be in charge so that his family would not starve to death and they could all eventually.
Right. So he ultimately saw that years later. But how do you think he was feeling at this point in the story, Lee? Do you think he felt his life was random?
I think he was feeling very put upon, that all this drama was happening to him.
Right.
The brothers, the Potiphar's wife, and then jail. So yes, I think eventually he saw it for what it was.
Right, but we're not there yet. So let's just stay in this point. Thank you. In this point of the story, if you put yourself into this 17-year-old, now he's probably about 22, 23, actually he has 2 more years in jail. So he's probably closer to 27, 28 years old. What is he feeling about his life so far? Do you feel he's made some insights? Does he have a sense of a destiny, or do you think he just feels his life is random, meaningless, put upon, as Lee said? Just I'm curious how you resonate with the story so far and what it does for you.
I'll just say briefly that I think that he was conflicted between all these things that were happening and his ego, which was telling him he was this amazing person. So I have a feeling that that was still in there somewhere. And so that may have been actually what kept him alive. I mean, that may have been one of the things, one of his survival tools. So that there was a glimmer of hope or a glimmer of something, or hey, if this random thing happened, then some other random thing can happen. It's like, you know, if it's just going to be random, it could be random any direction.
Right.
And it already had gone up and down. So, but I'm sure he was despaired
Right.
on many levels, but I think that there was something deep inside of him that was keeping him going.
Right. Thank you. That's a beautiful insight into his ego, which kept him going there, and hope. He was a ping pong before, he'll ping pong again, right? Other comments? See, because what Lee told us is ultimately what this narrative is about. The whole Joseph story leads us to where Lee told us we're going. But it's important for us in our lives, even right now, where you are right now in your life. Sometimes I feel, what is the point of these 8, 9, 10 months? We probably have 6 more months to go. What is the point of all this time? And then you read people are finding insights and what they're learning, and you know what they could do in quarantine, etc. You know, but on the other hand, in some ways it's random. In some ways it's kind of meaningless. It's both at the same time. You have to hold it all. So with Joseph, I just wonder how much was he holding at this point, and how much he needed to wait until he matured and got older to have any insights.
Excuse me, Rabbi Helen has her hand up.
I was going to say the same thing. I see Helen is raising her hand.
Helen Budin, please.
Well, when I was 25 or 26 years old, the world came crashing down. I was having trouble with my first husband. My father died suddenly when he was 58. And the world was just a terrible place. And I was 26 years old. And I went to a psychiatrist and he said, well, you're just suffering from all these calamities that have happened to you. So thank God, after eventually things started working out. But that time the world was a horrible place for me.
Did you feel you had some kind of destiny, that this was happening for a reason? Do you think you felt that at all?
No.
That there was some plan? Or it was just a horrible calamity?
No.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there's a plan. No. But
Thank you.
I finally worked myself out of it, and now I'm a more very optimistic person, even at my old age.
So the growth that we have as we age and the wisdom that we attain helps us with the life circumstances. Okay, let's go back now to our next PowerPoint. And here we see Rabbi Sacks doing something that you won't find with other traditional Torah commentators. So Rabbi Sacks steps out of just the biblical narrative, and he takes us into the culture around. And he said, what was going on here in terms of the philosophy of life, the difference between ancient Judaism and the ancient Greeks. Now, remember, the Torah story itself took place much earlier, but the Torah was actually redacted and written down about 400 BCE. So beginning of Hellenism was already there, and the Greek way of life was already there too. So how the editors of the Torah and the way they put it and the touches they put into the story would be contrasted then to the culture and the world around them. So let's start with the Greeks first. And Rabbi Sacks calls it in the Greek, in the word moira, which means blind faith. And building off of the Greek myths and Greek tragedies and comedies, human condition is tragic. And if you look at the famous play, The Oedipus, which many of us have studied and read, considered one of the famous Greek tragedies, the father, Laius, and the son, Oedipus, try to avert the tragic fate of an oracle. So they go to an oracle, and the oracle tells them that the son is going to marry the mother, and there's nothing, they try to change that fate. And of course, it ends up unfortunately happening that way without anybody even realizing it. So everything they do only brings it on. So they're saying very simply, your life has a destiny, a fate. This is what's going to happen. You have no human agency. There's nothing you can do. In response to that, Rabbi Akiva had his famous words in Pirkei Avot, in the famous the chapters of our ancestors, the ethics of our fathers, but I call them our ancestors. Rabbi Akiva say these famous words, and it's all nuanced and it's all layered in the gray area. He says, "Hakol tzafui v'hareshut netuna." All is determined. It's all revealed, and free will is given. So in contrast to Greeks, which is, there's no free will. If the gods want this to happen, they're capricious, they're arbitrary, the gods do what they want. You read Greek myths, they come and they go and they make your life a calamity in a second, and there's nothing you can do about it. But Judaism is very different. And Judaism believes that God is with us, guiding us on our way. And the Joseph story seems to be leading to tragedy. He's a ping pong back and forth. He goes up, he goes down. He has hope and it's bashed. Now he's still in jail. But in retrospect, events are necessary to fulfill Joseph's destiny. I mean, that's where Lee told us it's all going. All through the narrative in the Torah, we see people who, we start with Abraham, who is given promise after promise. He has 10 trials. He's told and promised all these things. You're going to have children. You're going to have land. People are going to bless you, and they'll use your name to bless others. And nothing comes true. But he still has faith. And ultimately, his trials lead to who he is and his destiny. And we see this through the stories of the patriarchs, the matriarchs, and now the Joseph narrative. I think it's such an important lesson for us. Look at the circuitous path on many of our lives, the marriages we go through, the jobs we had to go through, losses we encountered with friends, family members, children, parents, so much in our lives that had to happen in order for us to get to where we are and who we're meant to be. Let's do the next slide, please. So my Tante Esther always says, if you live long enough, and that was something her mother told her, if you live long enough, you never know what's going to be. So he was hated by his brothers, but 30 years later, he forgives them. But I love that section. It's a couple of parshio down the road. He plays the cat and mouse game. He's so human. He doesn't forgive them right away. He has to see if they've really made teshuvah, if they really have any contrition. So he's sold as a slave. He was going to be a nothing, and he becomes a viceroy, and he saves the region from famine and death. If you live long enough, God's guiding presence is at work, even when Joseph felt abandoned and alone. Why he had to spend more time in jail, Yiddish is verweist, who knows? As Gail Heim said, there's so much that's inexplicable we don't know. Why did the Israelites have to be slaves? Some say 210 years, some say 400 years. I'm in the 210 years. Why did God need them to be slaves for 210 years in order to have the Exodus and the foundation of Judaism, which we were slaves, so we don't treat others like slaves, and God took us out with miracles? I don't know. Why couldn't it just be 100 years or 50 years? I don't know. But whatever Joseph had to go through, he had to go through until he was able to move on to his destiny. And this is what Rabbi Sacks teaches us. Seen, this is, I quote from Rabbi Sacks, seen through the eye of faith, today's curse may be the beginning of tomorrow's blessing. And I went and found on the right this wonderful saying, the pain you feel today will be the strength you feel tomorrow. So let's stop the share for a moment, and let's share now with each other. Jump in. So we're at this part of the essay by Rabbi Sacks, and again, some of your feelings about this. How many of you resonate with what he's saying? How many of you disagree? How many of you want to share a life experience that enhances this view, or just share, period? Let's try some people who haven't spoken yet. Somebody else who hasn't spoken, join us. I might have to call on you, so jump in.
Helena, can I share?
Please, go ahead.
I very much resonate with the Joseph story. And I feel I was the Joseph in my family of 3 siblings. I had an older brother, I was the first daughter, and I have a younger sister. And our father died of cancer when I was 10 years old.
Mm.
My mother inherited all the hard work that my father did. It was a business and there was property. And my mother's brother maintained the custody and gave my mother an income so that our family could live. The time came when the property and the business was sold when I was a young adult. And my mother was crying and upset because she felt that her brother was taking advantage of her, the business that she and my father had started. My uncle was claiming was his, and he was cutting my mother out. My mother and my father had spent 20 years of their life, or 30, building this business. So I became the defender of my mother and confronted my uncle, and my brother and sister cut off from me. I was the Joseph in the family. They cut off, and we didn't speak for many of the years that I was raising my 3 children. There was a lifetime of being cut off because I defended my mother. And it took until my brother had cancer, probably in his early 60s. And I went to see him when he thought he was dying in the valley in the hospital. My brother was literally dying, and he then accepted me. And today, I resonate with Joseph because my brother and sister cut me out of their lives for the action that I took on the part of my defending my mother,
Right.
and her rights. And
Right.
she felt she needed to be defended.
Thank you. Thank you. So you resonate with Joseph did not phone home. After E.T. came out, a lot of the rabbis asked, why didn't Joseph ever phone home when he was the right hand of Pharaoh? And your brother and sister did not reach out to you. So that part of the story is.
We disrupted a lifetime.
So you were actually the Joseph. I mean, they were the Joseph in some ways because they didn't reach out. But there was some family reconciliation, which is also part of the story. But
we have reconciled today. My brother is 85, my sister's 74, and I'm 78. And my sister and I have a relationship today. My brother is still somewhat distant.
Thank God. So the ending of your story is like the Jacob story, where there was forgiveness, acceptance, and reconciliation.
We forgave each other. We have different lifestyles.
Beautiful.
We forgave each other.
Right.
And have some resolution.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So I feel life does have a purpose.
Yes. It takes a long time, though, to have it unfold, doesn't it?
It takes a long time. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
I
call on someone else? I want to know what Leslie Geffen thinks about all this. Leslie.
My apologies, because I just came into this discussion. I had a class until 12:30. And you may have already talked about this before, but the one thing that jumps into my mind for this is not a personal issue, but how does the Holocaust get framed in that? Does it get framed that it led to the birth of Israel? I mean, that's a big jump.
Do you know, he actually deals with this in the essay. Maybe not in this one, but in other essays too. There's no justification for the Holocaust. It's the most horrific. But those of us who have dealt with the Holocaust theologically for so long, people say God was in the camps. People say also that human events led to the Holocaust, and it would take humans to stop it, which is why the never again is so important for Jews. But Rabbi Sacks, alav shalom, deals more with survivors. So those who survived the Holocaust have a choice to make of how to look back at their lives and find meaning and purpose now, or forever stay stuck in the horrific.
So it's pretty much taken that to the personal level, not
Yes.
on
Yeah.
global.
Yeah, thank you. Who else am I going to call on? Someone jump in, or I'm calling on you. So Barbara Brown, what are you feeling at this point, thinking of this story? You have to unmute.
Unmute. I'm thinking that it's very much a combination of fate and genetics and situations and what you do with the situation that you're presented with. You can take a similar situation presented to two different people and have two completely divergent reactions to how to handle it, what to do, to forgive, to not forgive, all of those pieces. And I think it's exceptionally personal, and you grow, you change. What you thought you could never forgive, you find later in life you're more than willing to forgive and happy to have the opportunity to forgive.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another comment or two? Linda, with your beautiful Hanukkah background. Linda Fleischman.
Right here. I'm relating more to the earlier parts of the class than to this part. But so.
In what way?
Oh, the part about experience, because somebody already spoke on this. Every time something goes wrong, I always say, I've learned something. You follow me? This is my credo, because things happen every day. And if nothing else, if I can't learn from it, it sort of justifies the problem that happened. If you know what I mean?
Right.
Right. So that's.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in now? Any other comments? Do I need to call on somebody? I'll share a little bit. I found out in my life that there was some times when I had experiences that I just could not cope with. And like Helen said, you have to go to a therapist. But I mean, I'll sing their praises over and over again. I had to go to the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and be trained in mindfulness to overcome some of my issues. One of the, sometimes you let the feelings that you have define your life. And Joseph had every reason to be forsaken and forlorn and despaired. He could have been an angry man forever. And I think if I hadn't found meditation, mindfulness meditation, and the support that I found in my institute that I'm still so involved in, I don't think I would be right here even talking to you. I think I just would have gone down the rabbit hole. So I just want to share that with any of you. If you're schlepping along powerful emotions of despair, unhappiness, they've done me wrong song, or life is throwing me terrible calamities, or whining about the pandemic or whatever it is, to look up Headspace or Calm or any of these and do some of these quieting down meditations to just look at your life and say, oh, this is what I'm feeling. I could admit right now, I don't like this pandemic any more than anybody does. but I'm not going to be reactive to it. I'm just going to accept it and find moments of beauty and joy in whatever way I can. And God willing, we'll have the vaccine and everything else to get through it. But I know the other part of me would have just been stomping and screaming and whining and complaining and being pretty miserable. So I invite us all in the long run, because we're at the age of maturity, to be reflective on the past and to see why has our life led us in certain strange directions to get where we want to be. And who would we be if we didn't have that circuitous path? There's nobody on this Zoom today who had an easy road, who had a way they thought their life would unfold, and that's the way it unfolded. Every single one of us had calamities and challenges and different adventures and thrown off the path in some way. And I think that's why this Joseph narrative is so powerful. We're so often thrown off the path. And do you have faith? Do you believe that this is part of your ultimate life journey, your ultimate destiny? Do you have curiosity where it's going to lead? What's going to happen? What can you do to make it happen? Where are you on your journey? What else is left on your journey? These are all important questions. And I think this is part of the lessons that we learn here.
I think I saw Wendy Miller raise her hand, Rabbi.
Please, Wendy Miller.
Oh, I was going to relate to what you just said, Rabbi. Also, I was thinking in terms of the story of Joseph and why he was in prison, and we maybe gave him time to learn humility and self-reflective, to be self-reflective and to be a better person.
Right.
Because he came from ego, he was an egotist and full of himself, and this gave him time. And
beautiful. And this is what Marion said and that's why life is not binary. It's layered. On the one hand, Wendy, his ego probably helped him stay alive and believe he had a better tomorrow. But on the other hand, if he didn't quiet it down and squash it a little, he would never really be able to be effective in the world. Thank you. It's an excellent insight.
I see someone raising her hand in a yellow shirt with a pinkish background. I'm sorry, there's no name.
Okay, go ahead. Judy, go ahead. Unmute.
Did I do it?
Unmuted. Yeah, and why don't you just introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Judy Sherman. I've been in love for a while. Lynn is my sister of the heart. I don't know. This just brings up so many issues. My family and I have gone through some calamitous times. I mean, really, really bad times. I know before I was born, my family just went through, my brother was paralyzed. There was no money. Really bad stuff. And then I was born and I wasn't supposed to live. And it was this tiny, fragile thing. And then my brothers became jealous of me because I did so well. And we've had so much of a Joseph story just going on and on and on. And I'm thinking now about, the whole COVID situation, and it almost replicates that. At first it was very, very dark, and I've had changes in my life now that are leading me to be more optimistic. And it seems like for me, the terrible, terrible, terrible times that I've gone through where dear friends have died of horrible illnesses. I've really had some stuff to go through. But when I look back on it, it seems like the terrible, terrible has been a launch pad for growth and for ultimately something really, really good to happen. I don't know if that makes any sense.
You're right. It's very parallel to the Joseph narrative. Beautiful. And I know your daughter now is doing well, and you guys have a good relationship. Thank God. Yeah.
She's in god awful Kentucky with her boyfriend. But she's working.
That should continue.
She's working as an occupational therapist. One of her patients is a 9-year-old dying of a brain tumor, but yet she's learning and she's growing and she has a job and she has a car, and the boyfriend, the situation, he's no longer abusive. It's like the COVID kind of brought out the worst in their relationship, and it's now moving towards a better situation. It's just they now have a puppy, they have a good house. I don't know.
Right. So you don't know where it's going to be, but hopefully they'll take care of each other and themselves, and it will be.
And it's going better. And my brother and I, who've been estranged for so long,
right,
are now.
Thank you, Judy. All right, so anyone else want to talk?
Is that a Sam Wildman raising her hand?
Hi, this is just, you mentioned IJS and just want to share that I go there every morning now. It's on Zoom with Mark Margulies, the meditation for a half hour Monday through Friday. So I'll echo how wonderful it is. And I derive a great deal from it. It's
Right.
almost a miracle in this time.
It is, and
I-
Mark is phenomenal. Yeah.
oh, he's wonderful. He's wonderful.
Anyone can find it. Institute of Jewish Spirituality. They have sits every day, and they're having a big Hanukkah program coming on Sunday. So you could go and sign up. It's for free, and then you just make a little donation. It's nice.
And just one other thing to share with you, Toba. Last year, January 21st was my birthday. And in advance of that, my husband had been gone a year at that time, about 14 months. And a dear friend said, instead of taking you to lunch, I want to take you somewhere that I know will be important to you. I want to do something that I know will be important to you because of what you've expressed, you've been reading. So she took me to Temple Sinai last year, January 21st, when Rabbi Sacks spoke.
Oh.
It was probably the best. It made me happy. It gave me so much joy. The word is joy that you used. It was before COVID, but it still took me out of a sad place into a happy place. And reading
Do you
about him.
remember what was what he said that was so uplifting?
Everything.
He was such an optimist. He had such a positive view about life. And
absolutely. I know when he came into the room and he was surrounded by people, I just felt as though he was a presence that will stay with us forever, having read a lot of his material. And I have a CD or a disc or whatever it is from Chautauqua Institution, where he was up in New York, where he was a resident scholar a couple of summers ago. Right. And I've shared that with my temple Kol Tikva in Woodland Hills.
Right.
And I'm hoping to be able to share it on Zoom with them soon.
And that's the beautiful thing. Many of his lectures are around. We could hear him.
Yes.
And he left an indelible mark on the world, not only in the Jewish world, but on the world at large. So he was adored in the UK also. Okay, let's have one more comment. Susie Uray, what are you thinking about all this right now? And how does this affect the Joseph narrative affect you in your life?
Okay. So I related to a story that was shared about a parent dying young. I was also 26 when my mother died, a very huge presence in all four of our children's lives and grandchildren that were born at that time. My father was just really did whatever she wanted. In term, not a pushover, just whatever she wanted to do was his pleasure to do with her. So they went to the theater and they went to, they just did all of these things, and whatever restaurant you want to go to, and whatever she, led the way. After she passed, my father stepped up and had Friday night dinners. The man never went into the kitchen. And of course we had some help at home, but everyone knew Friday night dinner, you come to Papa's house. And that's all the way it was before also. You came to Granny and Papa's house, but it was really even more important, after she passed. He did Passover Seders, said, forget about, the nice dishes. I'm taking out the paper plates and this is the way we're doing it. It just didn't matter. And with my help in giving him some recipes and very funny stories back and forth about cooking carrots with no water, because I didn't tell him to put the water in the pot first. He was able to make dinner. And it was really such growth, a very, very wise man. So many people looked up to him, including Rabbi Alan Liu, who looked at him as his father. figure.
Oh, I love
So
Shalom.
he
I went
really
to
has
school
an
with Alan
amazing-
Liu. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing, amazing life that
So
the
how
trans-
does this connect to the Joseph story?
You know, I just think it's the transition. It's how well he dealt with the situation, and you know, that he really that he came more alive after my mother passed, and really became who he was meant to be.
Right.
You know, but it had to be without her, unfortunately.
Right. So like in the Joseph story, his life journey unfolded in a way he didn't want and didn't expect, and yet there was so much life after the death.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So I see people are ready to get off, and we're going to be done. So we're just going to share the last thing. Many of you know this poem, The Footsteps in the Sand, but after I read and studied this section of Rabbi Sacks, I felt this poem is very apropos. So I put it in here. So Maddie, please, the last page we're going to share, and then we'll be able after this to say goodbye. So many of you know this, The Footprints in the Sand. One night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand, and I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially in the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why. When I needed you the most, you would leave me. God whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you. Never ever during your trials and suffering. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. So let's have, we'll turn off the share. And that's I love that poem. I can't get enough of it. So any comments? Do you feel that that reflects what Rabbi Sacks was trying to tell us? All right, so let's have a closure. Why don't you share, let's go around, we'll have a few people tell us what they learned, what they're taking away with this, and wish each other a happy Hanukkah. So you took an hour or so out of your busy day, or not so busy day, depending. And what are you walking away with? Helen? You have to unmute, please, Helen.
Okay, so I'm started to read Judaism's life-changing ideas.
Right.
And it reminds me so much about the way it's written it's similar to the way you taught your Torah study classes to us. And the effect, the issue about applying the Torah study to your everyday life.
Right.
And I think that's very, very important for all of us.
Amen. We certainly had a great time in Torah study, and I miss it terribly. Amen, amen.
Yes.
Might have to do something about that after the pandemic. What else are you walking away with? Who hasn't spoken yet?
I'm walking away feeling optimistic and hopeful, and especially in these times when everybody is in despair and so anxious. I just feel that this gives me a new way to look at things, and it's extremely helpful.
Amen. Terry Turner, we haven't heard from you from Palm Springs.
I knew you would do this.
You knew. A little louder, Terry. We can't hear you.
Okay. Well, what I take away, I'll try to be brief. And when I read the pages that you sent, was that, well, first of all, I will say that I have trouble with feeling there is a master plan. I'm not sure if having destiny is part of that comment, because I feel that because of free will and because of random situations, that God isn't part, for me, God isn't part of that. But what's so beautiful to look at is how much when it had happened to me, a tragedy, that how much growth I've had since that. I've probably quadrupled my beingness since that happened, which was, I was 40. So I'm 73 now. And I look back at from that time to 40, and I did stuff, but nothing compared to what I have done since 40, since I've now looked back and have grown and have developed and all of those things. So the teaching that Rabbi Sacks did today, what I read and the Joseph story really, really cemented that for me.
Thank you so much. Any other closing comments? Gail, you want to close it up too? What are you taking away from this chapter today?
Look, we have a choice. The way we think is a choice. And I choose to believe that each life experience, sorry about probably a spam call. I choose to believe that every life experience, including COVID, is going to enhance who I am. And I'll figure it out, as he says, I'll go forward and I'll look back, and there will be wonderful lessons learned.
Beautiful. So our people are outside, the landscapers. I could barely hear myself think, but I think it's time to wrap it up. I appreciate so much you all coming on to study together today. I hope we're uplifted by this story. I know myself that this Joseph narrative has so much to teach us. And may we all be blessed to be able to look back at our lives with kindness and gentleness, and understand that there's so much we can learn and so much more. As long as we have our health and we're still around, we have so much more living to do. So I think we don't even know ultimately what more we have to contribute and give back and to experience. And I just bless us all with opportunities for joy and happiness over Hanukkah. However you're going to celebrate it, make the most out of it. You could Zoom with people, you could call me up, I'll light the candles with you, whatever you need to do. No one needs to be upset or alone. Make the most out of it. There's Dina with her beautiful menorah. And let's go forth and find moments of light and happiness and joy. Yes, Leslie.
No, I just was waving to everyone and saying Chag.
All right, let's all say Happy Hanukkah together. 1, 2, 3. Happy Hanukkah. Thank you all. Thank you, Maddie, for being our mistress and making this happen. And we're looking forward to the next study soon. So happy Hanukkah. God bless. Keep on studying. Light those candles. Amen, amen.
I'm Marion.
Hi, who said that?
Terry.
Hi, Terry.